In this lesson, we're going to be dealing with another type of chart in Excel, and this is something that you may run into as you get into more advanced math or as you get into other subjects. This is going to be the scatter plot. Now, a scatter plot shows relationships between two sets of data that might or might not be related. For example, you might go out into the woods and you might say, okay, well, I know the age of these various trees. So you make a chart and you show the age of each of the trees, and then you measure their height. And you make a chart that shows in one column the age of the trees and the second column their heights. And you could say, okay, let's see if those two are related, the age of the tree and the height. And you make a chart that would show that. Those would be two items of information that would probably be related to some degree. As a tree gets older, it gets taller. But you might also have two sets of data that are not related at all. For example, you might go to a car dealer and you measure the lengths of the cars and you look at the price of those cars. And so you make a graph that shows, okay, here is the length of these various cars and here are the prices of each of those cars. Well, you know that the length of a car and the price of the car are not related. So you would plot a chart, but you would see from that chart that they're not related. But that's how you use a scatter plot. It helps you to show relationships. And this is generally when we're talking about real-world measurements that you use scatter plots. In algebra, for example, you learn about lines and you have the graph of a line, and points, you have functions. Okay, so you've got a function so that for every, for an x there is a y output, that type of thing. Well, in the real world, a lot of times things don't work on those precise levels. So that, for example, in algebra, when you have a function, you know that for an x there is only one y output. You can't have an x that's going to give you two different y outputs. But in the real world, you may have one variable, for example, the age of a tree, that you might have two trees that are both the same age, but they may have two different heights for various reasons. So in the real world, you have to do things that show the relationship, that show the correlation is a more technical word. And so correlation, when you get into statistics, correlation, and especially we're going to be looking at the square of the correlation, is a number between 0 and 1. And as that number gets closer to 1, it's a higher degree of relationship. As the number gets closer to 0, as that correlation squared gets closer to 0, there's less relationship. Okay, now this is all pretty abstract, so let's look at an example here. What I have is a chart that, let's say that I own an ice cream shop. And I notice, just kind of as I'm doing selling, I notice that as the temperature goes up outside, I sell more ice cream. I mean, that makes sense. When it's hotter, you're going to sell more ice cream. So I make a chart, and over a period of days, I notice, okay, here's the high temperature for the day. So I've graphed, I've made a chart of that. I've recorded the high temperature of the day, and then I've recorded what my sales were for that day. So I want to make a graph or a chart that's going to show the relationship between those two, if there is one. Now you could look at the numbers and you could say, okay, here's 215, here the temperature was 67.56, so I sold 215. Here the temperature went up, I sold more. Here the temperature went down, I sold less. When it got pretty hot here at 81.78 or 87.18, you notice that the sales went up. So let's make a chart, though, which helps us to see that even better. So I'm going to select my information. Notice I just selected all the cells there with the information. I go up here to Insert, and one of my chart types is a scatter chart. That's what we're talking about, a scatter chart or a scatter plot. And there's several types you can have here. We're just going to take, we'll take this basic one here. And let me make this larger. so that we can see it a bit easier. Okay, so here is our chart. Now I can, you notice that in Excel, that's what we're working in, I can put my cursor over one of the points and it tells me, okay, that was $185 at 63.42. Okay, looks like that's probably that pair of data points there. If I go over here, I've got $215, 67.56 for the temperature, and so on. Okay, now, but you can look at that and see, okay, as the temperature goes up here, as this temperature goes higher, the dollars tend to go up as well. Okay, that you have basically it goes upward towards the right. Now Excel has another type of chart though, where it will calculate what's called the line of best fit. And if you look up here in the chart layout, you'll see that there's one that you see it's got a little line there, so that shows, okay, that's probably what we're talking about. So let me click on that, and what this has done now, it's drawn a line called the line of best fit that basically is a straight line to best represent all these points. Okay, but there's something else that might give us a little bit more information. There's one here that you notice it has a little fx. That's in algebra, that's what we talk about as a function. Okay, so it's a function, and if I click on that, now look at what I've got. I've got an equation, y equals 0.0548x plus 53.543, which basically means this, that's the graph of this line. That's the equation of this line. That for any x value, that is, okay, going across here, I multiply it by 0.0548 and then add 53.43, I'm going to get my temperature. Okay. And here's something else, r squared. That is the correlation squared. Okay. And you'll notice it's 0.9168. And remember I said that as that number gets closer to 1, you have a higher degree of correlation. Now, if you just have random numbers, that number drops. So let me show you how that might work. Okay, generally the sales go up as the temperature goes up. Let's say, okay, here's a high temperature of 87.18, but let's say that my sales are $100 then instead of what they were. Okay, now you notice I've got high temperature, low sales. My line all of a sudden has flattened out. If I go here to, here's one of my low temperatures, and let's say that I sold $900 then. Okay, now you notice that my r squared is a lot lower. Okay, and my line is closer to horizontal. It's harder to draw a line that goes through or close to a bunch of those points. If I've got 72.96 and I say I sold $1 on that day, okay, well, now see here my correlation squared is even smaller. Okay, so that means that there really isn't a valid relationship between ice cream sales and temperature. If this is the data that I have, there's not a valid relationship. But if I undo those, okay, we're back to this way. You see that there is, you can see that as the temperature goes up, my sales go up, and vice versa. So this is what we're talking about with a scatter plot, is showing the relationship between two sets of numbers.